Hello, you're listening to Wine Blast. I'm Susie Barry and I'm here as ever with my husband and fellow Master of Wine, Peter Richards. And we are going to dive right in today, aren't we?
Is that an instruction or a threat?
It might be, both.
Okay, I'm on board. I think everyone listening is too, as ever. Always good to move me along. But that is, I'm always happy to dive in equally. It's an invitation I'll never refuse. So today we're talking about glass bottles, aren't we?
We are indeed. So this is a slightly different kind of programme for us because we were approached by the team at British Glass who felt that glass bottles had been unfairly maligned in the wine world of late, and they proposed that we did an episode on the subject of glass bottles.
Yeah, so we looked first and foremost into the research and the evidence, and we found this really fascinating and quite a thought-provoking topic, didn't we? So we were really happy to partner up with them. I mean, I think all us wine blasters are interested in making the world a better place, particularly when it comes to the environment, to pollution, to climate change. And we're also passionate about our wine. And how wine gets to all of us, is a really important part of that.
Yeah, so various studies around the world have identified packaging and shipping as having the biggest impact on wine's carbon footprint. Dr. Richard Smart, a famous viticultural scientist and now international consultant, he predicted recently that glass bottles will soon become dinosaurs. And lots of commentators at the moment are very keen to champion alternative formats like cans or pouches or bag-in-box, basically intimating that glass bottles with corks are simply representative of how resolutely traditional and lacking in innovation the wine world is. Essentially saying glass bottles have been around for hundreds of years. Why haven't we moved on from them?
Yeah, now, obviously, environmental concerns are critical in all of this. But what we thought was, it's not just as clear-cut as alternative formats good, glass bad.
I mean, it rarely is.
It rarely
as
is
clear as that.
Exactly. So we wanted to dive a bit deeper into this. It might sound quite trendy and right on to say that, to say, oh, glass is too traditional. But actually, it's more complicated. There are choices to be made, quite complex choices, on the basis of lots of different evidence and implications. And that's really what we wanted to get into, what we wanted to look into and explore and kind of present for debate and discussion, wasn't it? The bigger picture,
yeah,
if you like.
Yeah. So if you remember, just in our last episode when we were talking to Chateau Montelino winemaker Matt Crafton.
Oh, the lovely Matt.
He was lovely, wasn't he? And we asked him about lightweighting bottles, which actually means making glass bottles lighter, so they have less of an environmental impact when they're shipped all around the world. And this is actually something that Montelino have apparently been doing for 15 years. And Matt ended by saying, because what really matters is what's in the bottle and the fact that it gets to you right.
Where was the American accent?
And the fact that it gets to you right. Says a bit corny.
It makes you sounding a bit.
Matt
sounding a bit Wild West. Sorry about that, Matt. I quite like
a bit
it.
Dolly Parton.
I'm not sure it's Matt. Dolly Parton. To put it another way, though, how and why does it matter what container your wine comes in? What is glass? What are the implications of glass bottles? Kind of all the way through the piece, both before, during, and after use. We don't often think about all of those things. So, we talked to two very, very interesting people. One of whom is Simon Lawson. He's the general manager Europe for Casella family brands, makers of one of the world's biggest selling wine brands of all, Yellowtail. But before that, you had another sort of fascinating chat, didn't you?
Yeah. I spoke to Dr. Nick Kirk, and he's the technical director at British Glass, which is the representative body for the glass manufacturing sector in the UK. And it was really interesting. It was a really interesting chat, particularly at the end when we got talking about the future of glass. But I began by asking him to start at the beginning to explain what glass is, how it's made, and why it's so widely used.
Well, that's a good question, Susie. And if we go back a little bit in history, the Egyptians were really the first civilization to really use glass for everyday use. And then the Romans really took that on and made it more popular. And as we can see in lots of artifacts, that there's lots of glass still remaining that contain wine and other food stuff. And it demonstrated it's an ideal product for containing food and drink. So if we actually look at what glass is, it's quite simple, really. It's really sand, limestone and soda ash, three abundant materials that are mixed together and melted at about 1500 degrees and then cooled down very slightly and then blown into shapes. And the blowing process is really very simple in that you take a bit of glass and you inject air into it and blow it into a form, and you can make some fantastic shapes. But it's very simple. Originally, it's done all by hand, but nowadays it's all automated. So that's simply what glass is. It's a simple manufacturing process.
And so what is it mainly used for these days? Is it mainly bottles?
Well, it has probably three main sectors it's really used for. The food and drink sector for bottles and jars, which we see every day around us. And also what gets forgotten about is the glass around us. So all the windows we use in car windscreens, it's all glass. And things like fiberglass for insulating the building. So really, it's all around us. It's everywhere. We use it every day. And I think sometimes we just look straight through it and don't actually see it.
Now, I know that glass making is a fairly energy intensive process, but just explain to us how much energy and what type of energy is used.
Yeah, so when I mentioned that glass is melted at about 1500 degrees. So as you can imagine, that requires a lot of energy. The energy that's used nowadays in the UK tends to be natural gas, which is obviously fossil fuel. And it consumes quite a lot of energy to melt those raw materials down. But one advantage is if we actually use recycled glass, that takes 25% less energy. So by us recycling more, returning it back to the furnace where it makes more bottles and jars, we're actually having a positive impact on the environment by reducing energy consumption that then relates to CO2 reduction.
But in general, what would you say, if any, attempts are being made to reduce, sort of putting the recycling to one side for the moment, what attempts are being made to reduce energy usage and then obviously the subsequent emissions?
Yes, well, because energy is such a large cost to glass manufacturing, the glass manufacturers are always looking at opportunities to reduce the energy use, which obviously impacts on the CO2. And over the past sort of 30, 40 years, energy consumption has dropped by about 50%. So it's really dropped a lot. And as an industry, we're really engaged in heading towards what we call net zero. So to actually eliminate all the CO2 from the glass manufacturing process. And I'm really confident we will achieve it. It is a challenge, but we will achieve it.
When you say it's reduced by 50%, I mean, how has that been achieved?
That's just been achieved by energy efficiency measures. So looking at the way the furnace has been designed, how it's insulated better, the productivity of the process improved. So you get less and less losses along the way. So all those added up over the years has contributed to that large reduction.
I think I read somewhere about a new furnace coming into production potentially that would not require nearly as much energy. There's something being produced at the moment that would be almost allow you to be net zero.
Yes, there's a couple of schemes going on, and there's a program within the UK called Glass Futures, which is looking at opportunities for the future for the glass industry. And what we're really looking at there is to move away from fossil fuels and move towards more renewable energy, such as bio-derived fuels, hydrogen, or electricity from renewables. And it can melt glass using electricity very well. And as soon as we get renewable electricity in the UK, we'll eliminate the CO2 emissions overnight.
And is the problem at the moment the fact that the electricity is so, it would need so much electricity that that makes it not viable?
It's not so much that, it's more the actual cost of electricity. Electricity costs are probably 2 or 3 times more expensive than natural gas. Therefore, it's cost driven at the moment. But I see in the future, as electricity prices come down and gas prices probably stabilise, there'll become a point when it becomes equally advantageous to go to electricity and start using electricity for melting.
And could you use solely electricity for melting? Would that work?
You could achieve that, yes. I think it might be a mix of fuels looking at hydrogen, which the government's investing very heavily at the moment in hydrogen. There's a couple of networks around the country where they actually be looking at putting hydrogen into the national grid system. So once that's available, the mix of hydrogen, electricity, and maybe biofuels, we will be able to achieve that net zero aim.
And in your opinion, how long will that take?
Well, the target's set at 2050. And as we see nearly every day on the news, government's always pushing and pushing harder. I believe we will achieve that before that date. Some glass manufacturers are probably running at a higher pace than others, but I think it will be achieved.
So let's move on to where it sits with wine. Now, glass it's heavy compared with a lot of other packaging. It's breakable. Given a bottle's shape, it entails a lot of lost space in transit. Packaging and shipping, and particularly the glass bottle, are often singled out as the biggest contributor to wine's carbon footprint. I think it's been estimated that a glass bottle accounts for around 40% of a standard 75 centilitre wine bottle's carbon emissions throughout its life. I mean, how can glass really be part of a sustainable future for wine?
Well, first of all, we need to look at a wine bottle. It's an ideal product for storing wine in. It doesn't react with the wine at all. It's inert. It doesn't allow CO2 or oxygen to diffuse through it. So it's a permanent barrier. So it's a perfect material for containing wine. But you're quite right in saying that we are moving around the world, lots of wine bottles. And I believe in the UK, we import over 1 billion wine bottles into the UK each year. But what's happened since about 2005, the industry have been looking and also engaging in bulk importation of wine into the UK. This is where you bring 22,000 litres of wine in a bag within a shipping container, and you fill it in the UK in bottles produced in the UK. And that really saves around about 40% of the actual transport emissions or CO2 emissions. So again, a really good step forward. And currently on the UK market, it's nearly 40% of wine sold in the UK is actually bottled and filled in the UK. So that's happening, and probably the consumer's not really aware of that real benefit.
No, I think absolutely. I've definitely keep seeing more and more about the fact that the bulk wine shipping is growing all the time. And I think, yes, that has surely got to be a really good way forward. And I know some commentators criticise the wine world for being sort of stuck in the mud, overly traditional in its reliance on glass bottles, and lacking, I think they say, one would say lacking imagination and innovation in sticking with glass rather than looking to several new solutions. How would you respond to that?
Well, I wouldn't say we're stuck in the mud, because I'm coming back to my earlier comment, really. Glass is the ideal material for containing wine and many other food and drinks products, because it's a permanent barrier. It doesn't react with the wine at all, so it doesn't actually affect the quality or taste. So that's really acknowledged. And also the shelf life of wine in glass bottles is far, far longer than any other packaging format. So from that point of view, it's giving shelf life extensions way above what plastics and other materials can offer. But when it comes to innovation, the glass industry and the designers of glass bottles are innovating some fantastic bottles. It may be not so much in the wine sector, but if you look at the spirit sector, especially the gin sector now, there's some fantastic bottles, and some of the decoration and enhancements on the surface are really incredible and really do enhance that product, really deliver the brand distinction that brand owners really like. So I'd say we're not stuck in the mud. We're actually pushing the barriers and really putting some exciting products in the market.
And on a not so exciting level, what about lightweighting? That's how successful has that been? Making a bottle much lighter. I mean, so many wine producing regions seem to use these sort of heavy bottles, and surely that's not necessary.
It isn't necessary. You're quite right there. And I don't know why that's evolved, but I think there's some relationship between what's believed to be quality over weight. And I think that's evolved over many years, that consumers believe the weight relates to quality. And you can probably add a lot more comment to this, but I don't believe that at all. That's not the issue. I think when it comes to lightweighting, over the past 15 years in the UK, we've actually reduced the glass weight of wine bottles significantly. The average weight about 2005 was probably around about 500 grams. Typically now in the UK, it's less than 400, if not 350, and some are down to about 330. So that weight is being reduced. And I think it's really important. We hear the word lightweighting, but my take on it is we're not trying to lightweight, we're trying to find the right packaging for the product. And when it comes to wine, we are trying to find the right weight. So for a champagne bottle, it has to be heavier. It's got to resist a lot higher internal pressure, a lot more sort of abuse the way it's used, and it's stored for a lot longer. The champagne making process requires a cork and things to be removed from time to time. So it needs a different type of bottle. So it has to have some weight to gain strength. And that internal pressure is quite high. It can be 6, 7, 8 bar internal pressure, so a very high pressure. But we come to still wines, and lightweighting down below 400 grams is very easy to do nowadays with modern technology.
That's more of a consumer perception, and we've got to change. I mean, a bit in the way that we might have changed consumers' minds, hopefully, or the industry has over time about screw caps. Then I think, you know, it sounds to me like you're saying that people just need to not equate weight with quality.
And that's a good summary, really. And that's my perception of what's happening. The consumer associates weight with quality.
So when we talk about glass being the ideal receptacle for wine, I mean, partly, obviously, wine is acidic. It's got the alcohol in, which is a solvent. So that will react with certain things over time. It won't react with glass. So glass is definitely good in the for longer aging wines. But you know, what about the alternative formats when we look at sort of bag-in-box pouches, recycled PET, paper bottles? They obviously work fine for shorter term or less long-lived wines, but there is an element of plastic involved. Where do you sit on that debate, the use of plastic in general in those alternative formats?
Well, I suppose I'll turn the question around a little bit. The way I sit is, if we look at recyclability, to me is very important. And when it comes to recyclability of glass, it's very easy to recycle. You dispose of your wine bottle when you've consumed it. You can leave the cap on, put it outside your door, and all glass, no matter what part.
Sorry, I can pick you up on that? So you can leave your screw cap on?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. There's no problem with that. This recycling process will extract that. It's a valuable material because they tend to be aluminium. So it's a good way of recovering the caps.
And what about things that are left in the bottle? You know, bits of wine or labels stuck on, or food if it's, I mean, it's not in wine, but you know, just in a jar.
The advice is, just from a simple hygiene point of view, is to wash it out. But if it's inconvenient to wash it out, there's no problem leaving the residue of food or drink in there, because the process of making glass, melting at 1500 degrees, will destroy all that.
So you can just literally screw your screw back on and shove it in the recycling. Yeah.
And if I buy a wine from Australia or South America, it'll be exactly the same composition. So it can be recycled in the UK, or it can be recycled any other part of the world. If you take a lot of other packaging formats, so you mentioned bag in the box, it's multi-material. It has to be taken apart. So the cardboard can be recycled. The inner bag needs to be separated. The actual stopper, the tap needs to be separated. So it's complex for the consumer to recycle. As I say, with glass bottle, you put it out into your recycling bin and that's it.
But, you know, to be fair to the alternatives, I mean, would you say that there is no place for them?
I think there's a place for other packaging formats, because there are different locations and occasions we consume wine. So I fully understand if you're consuming wine outdoors on a picnic, it might not be appropriate to take a glass bottle out. If you take a bag in the box, you can consume the wine, you can fold the box down afterwards. So I can really see in those locations, those occasions, there is a part for different packaging formats. But I think glass still plays a major role in packaging for wine because of its benefits of preserving it for such a long period of time.
And just going back to the recycling, I know that there's a lot of talk about closed loop recycling for glass. Could you just explain that?
Yeah, the term closed loop is effectively, you'll buy your bottle of wine from your retailer, your supermarket, you'll consume the contents, you'll place it in a recycling bin, your local authority will take it away with all your other packaging waste, or sort it, separate out the glass. The glass will then go back to the glass manufacturer. He'll melt it, make another bottle, it'll go to be filled, and it'll go back to the retailer. So it goes round in a closed loop, sometimes called a circular economy, where it just goes round and round. So it's not open-ended, it's not going for disposal. Now, if glass does go for disposal, it's not a good thing, but it doesn't cause much impact on the environment. So a really good example of this is if you ever go to the beach and you see little glass pebbles on a beach, that's sometimes broken glass that's been there over years, made into little pebbles, but it's causing no harm to the environment. But we do see that other packaging materials, we've spoken about plastics, there's some real bad press about plastics at the moment, what harm they're causing to the marine environment. But glass doesn't contribute to that at all.
And just on the note of the recycling and the stuff that doesn't go back into the recycling loop to make more bottles, and I think is it about 70% of glass is recycled. Why can we not be at 100? Are you hoping for 100? Would you like to see 100%? Presumably you would.
Very, very much so. And technically 100% can be achieved. Putting 100% glass back into making glass bottles can be achieved. As a glass industry, we are really supporting the drive towards collecting more and more glass for recycling. And we've set an objective of achieving 90% by 2030. Again, I believe that can probably be sooner, but I think it's realistic that we will be able to achieve 90% collection for recycling by 2030.
You heard it here first. But I mean, presumably, again, we're back to the energy thing. It does take a reasonable amount of energy to recycle glass. Are you again trying to reduce that?
Yeah, and that's part of our net zero strategy to decarbonise the manufacturing process. As I say, we have a plan for 2050, but I'm sure we'll achieve it before then. And year on year, carbon and energy is being reduced on every piece of glass that's manufactured.
And just going on to the colour of glass. So we obviously have mostly brown, green, clear. Is there an issue with when you put your green bottle in for recycling? Presumably that can't become a clear bottle. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's quite correct. The three main colours, you're quite right to say, are your green, your brown and your clear. And in most collection areas now in local authorities, they're collected as one colour, all mixed together, which is absolutely no problem whatsoever, because there's been a big investment in the technology to actually sort those back into three primary colours. So they're sorted out into three primary colours, and then each colour then is destined to go back into making that colour glass again.
But we obviously use more. We buy more green glass, but we actually produce in the UK more clear glass, don't we? So, and I think clear's the issue, isn't it? That trying to make clear glass, is the more difficult one. What would make a difference to that?
That's quite correct, because we, as we're talking about wine today, we actually import obviously a lot of wine into the UK, which tends to be in green glass, but we also manufacture a lot of clear glass in the UK, but we export that for the spirit sector. So over 90% of clear glass for spirit sectors goes for export. So we have an imbalance where we have a lot of green glass in the waste, but the glass manufacturers are manufacturing a lot of clear glass. So the drive really is to try and get more and more clear glass collected. And a lot of clear glass tends to be food containers, so your sort of jam jar type of glass. So part of what British Glass are doing is trying to drive more of that to be collected. Now, when you look at green glass, the actual recycled content at the moment is probably around about 80%. It will go up to 90, 95% quite easily. Clear glass does vary. It can be between about 40 and 50%. So there's still a little way to go on the clear glass. There's a little bit of a technical limitation, is that when you start to recycle more and more clear glass, you tend to lose the whiteness of the glass. It tends to become slightly green. So there's a little bit of a limitation there. And I think this is always the challenge, is what the consumer's perception is against the brand owner's perception. And I think sometimes the consumer has a different perception to what the brand owner really has when it comes to things like design and colour.
And what about reuse? Rather than recycling, for example, people taking their bottles back to a supermarket or a retailer and filling from a keg, maybe. Could that work?
I can't see why it can't work. And a really good example we have at the moment is the milk bottle. And one thing that's been noticed over the past year or so, and it may be related to COVID and people being at home, is that we've seen an increase in people buying milk in milk bottles to be delivered at the home. And that's a fantastic example of reusable glass, because it works in a local economy. So it's a local dairy, they supply the milk to you, consume it, you put your milk bottle back out, they take it back, clean it, fill it, and it comes back. So it works in a very local area, it works very effective. And I know many supermarkets are now looking at other products, sort of pastas and other dry products and oils and things like that, where you take a container back to be refilled. And again, I see that has a place and it will be successful. I think the biggest challenge is on more international brands. So we're talking about wine today. How would it work with a wine bottle that's come from abroad? How would that effectively could be refilled? There's a big challenges there, but on a local basis, it works very well.
And in terms of brand owners and retailers, what could they do to help? If you were to say one thing to them that they could do to help you as British Glass to get people reusing or recycling or whatever, what would be the thing that they could do to help in that quest?
I think coming back to recycling, I think it's joining forces with British Glass to actually give those positive messages out to their consumers that by recycling their glass, it is actually used again back in glass packaging. Some packaging doesn't actually go back into packaging again. It may go to another use. But with glass, it can go back into making a glass bottle and jar again. So I think it's getting that message across. And there are some perceptions that glass doesn't go back for glass recycling because it gets tied up with other packaging materials where there's been bad news again, where it's been exported and not actually been recycled. So we need to get that message that it's kept in the UK, it's recycled in the UK to make more bottles and jars.
So I'm going to go back just briefly to the when you talked about making bottles, innovation, making bottles for spirits that are very innovative. So why, given the problems of transportation and space, why can't we say could we make a square or rectangular wine bottle without a neck or a punt in the bottom that would take the neck of the next bottle, so you could stack them or pack them so much more efficiently, and maybe also make them litre bottles rather than 75 centilitre, so that any transportation, forgetting the bulk transportation, but actual transportation of bottles would be way more efficient and space saving.
Yeah, very interesting thought. I haven't really considered that, to be quite honest, but you can make square bottles, as you've probably seen. A lot of bottles in the spirit sector tend to be square. The trouble with making square bottles, they tend to be very difficult to make lightweight because you've got the way the forming process works, you've got to force glass into the corners. So they tend to be heavier per the volume they contain. So it would be really a balance. If you could make a lightweight bottle, would that be better than making a square bottle that's slightly heavier? So I think you'd have to balance those considerations.
So where do you think glass bottles will be in 5 years' time? What will have changed to make glass a more sustainable option? And what might a futuristic wine bottle look like?
Well, I'll answer the first question first. I think over the next 5 years, we'll continue to reduce the weight of bottles. That will continue to happen. And also the associated CO2 with each of those bottles will continue to reduce. So the environmental impact will reduce and we'll see more glass being recycled. Over the past couple of years, recycling has already started to increase in the UK and it's continued to increase. Also, with the support of government to put policy in place to actually force people to recycle, will have benefits as well.
And so your futuristic wine bottle?
There's quite a lot of developments going on at the moment, looking at the actual bottle. And the weakness with a bottle is its surface. When it breaks from the surface. So if you can protect the surface, change the chemistry in some way, you can actually make it stronger. And there's quite a bit of research going on looking at how do we make glass bottles stronger. Therefore, if you make them stronger, you can make them lighter. So I think the futuristic view will be they'll start to get lighter and lighter and lighter, but they'll be modified on the surface to allow that to happen.
Dr. Nick Kirk, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Fascinating to hear about the latest developments there, kind of looking into changing the chemistry of glass to make it less breakable. I'm not sure I quite understood about the glass breaks from the surface, but it sounded interesting.
Well, yeah.
But the idea of making glass a lot stronger by changing its breakability or the way it breaks to then make it lighter. If they could just do that with square bottles, like you suggested, I love that suggestion. Bingo, that would be one way of doing it.
But I mean, interesting also, he said glass is all around us. We use it every day, but sometimes we look straight through it and don't really see it.
Bit of a pun there.
A little bit. But obviously what he's really saying is that there's a risk that we just take glass a bit for granted.
That's very true.
But I mean, it's been such an integral part of wine's history. You could argue that fine wine would not exist today if it wasn't for the glass bottle. I mean, it's allowed wine to be transported and served in good condition. It's allowed wine to age and develop. I mean, we always refer to a bottle of wine. It's so ingrained.
Yeah, it's true, isn't it? It's the automatic reflex.
It is. I mean, now that doesn't obviously automatically make it right that we stick with glass, but equally, if we do take all of glass's benefits for granted and rush into abandoning it in favour of these new alternative forms of packaging, I think we may well ultimately regret that decision.
But it's kind of a trade-off, isn't it? You know, glass is heavy, it's
It is.
breakable comparatively, and it's quite energy intensive to make. You know, but it doesn't involve plastic being generated, and which can then get into the environment.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to add that a lot of plastic bottles and formats do use recycled plastic like rPET, but not all. But again, it's one thing being recyclable, quite another actually being recycled properly and not just exported to another country or burnt. And I think, as Dr. Nick Kirk said, it's complex for consumers to recycle a lot of this stuff. And also, I mean, encouraging plastic production isn't great, is it?
No, ideally not. And it is just, I suppose it's just confusing, isn't it? And we need simplicity in our lives. But, you know, I think the more that energy switches to renewable, you know, so glass's carbon footprint goes down, you know, because the energy inputs into making and recycling are ever cleaner. But that's part of a much bigger picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, but either way, supporting the drive to renewable energy generation on a macro level obviously really helps in this, doesn't it? And who knows, you know, if we can keep the trend of this year going, which I think saw carbon emissions dip by 8%, of course, you know, because of the pandemic, but at least it sets a precedent. It shows that things can be done. You know, and also the fact that significant kind of post-COVID reinvestment is potentially planned for renewables, you know, then there is, you know, hope for this going in the right direction.
There is. I mean, ultimately, I think it may well be a question of horses for courses. Traditional method sparkling wine has to be in bottle because that's how it's made, and the pressure inside that bottle needs the bottle's strength. Fine wine meant for aging pretty much has to be in a bottle because alternative formats can't as yet protect against oxidation or packaging failure beyond a couple of years. However, for mass market wines and brands, a mix of bulk shipping with destination bottling and alternative formats is probably very sensible.
Yeah. I think, maybe it's a question of, you say, horses, of course, is the package kind of needs to fit the product, doesn't it? All the while being conscious of the environmental impact on various different levels and the quality and consistency of the wine, which is, you know, surely really, really important. And I think in all of this, wine needs to be creative and imaginative, but also, you know, you could also say less tolerant of super heavy bottles, those super heavy bottles which can weigh almost a kilo by themselves. There's no need for that, is there really?
No. And there could be a way of doing reuse as well. I mean,
I like that. I like that idea.
I mean, I love the idea of having kegs in your local shop and then you just go and refill your bottles. I mean, it would make me feel like I was on holiday, but I genuinely love that idea.
Well, they do that a lot in Europe, don't they? And I think maybe, you know, as our English wineries get more and more proficient, let's have a tap at our local winery.
Cellar door wine on tap.
I think you'd have to drink the wine quite quickly, but again, I don't see a problem with that. Anyway.
That's never a problem in this house.
We wanted to get a different take on all of this. So I spoke to Simon Lawson, who, as I mentioned, is General Manager Europe at Casella Family Brands. Now, he's been in the trade 40 years, so he knows the business inside out. And Casella are owners, among a few other things, of Yellowtail, one of the world's biggest selling wine brands by volume, shifting nearly 37 million bottles in the UK and rated by Wine Intelligence as the world's most powerful consumer wine brand. Casella is an Australian company that moves huge amounts of wine around the globe. So I started by asking him to talk us through the key decisions when it comes to packaging and transporting a large-scale global brand like Yellowtail.
Yeah, I guess, it's a really important factor for us. We're present in over 50 markets, for example, and we've got a massive community sort of behind us. So, you know, what we do with regards to getting wine to market is really, really important. So we have to look at it in the context of being sustainable for the environment, being sustainable economically, and of course, you know, a really close eye on quality. You know, we've got to think about what our consumers expect wherever in the world they're drinking Yellowtail.
So, you know, what do you do? I mean, are glass bottles the best way to package your wine?
Our view is yes. I mean, it was interesting, actually. I remember talking to John Casella about this some time ago, and he said to me, Simon, it's either glass or it's glass. And kind of when I probed him a little bit further on that, it was really down to the fact that he felt it was best for quality. It's inert, in effect. It doesn't add or take away from the wine. When we consider the sort of length of the supply chain, you know, we kind of want to keep wine away from oxygen for as long as possible. And actually, once you get wine into distribution, even a fast-moving brand like Yellowtail does still hang around a little bit on shelf for a period of time. So you kind of want it to be in the best possible container. And, from our point of view, glass is the answer. I guess it has been for several hundred years, and I'm sure it will be into the future too.
Moving forward, obviously sustainability is a key thing. All major brands are addressing this issue quite rightly. Wine needs to get ahead of the curve, be more sustainable, minimize its impact on the environment. Now, glass bottles and shipping of glass bottles is one of the biggest impact. And obviously glass has been blamed. It's heavy, it's breakable, it's not very efficient in terms of space. What are you doing if you want to have your wine in glass bottles from a quality point of view? What are you doing to minimize that impact?
Well, the first thing is, one of the key bits that we can influence is the shipping from Australia to the UK, to Europe. So we ship in bulk, and that basically reduces our carbon footprint by around about 40%. That's taken a huge chunk of carbon out of our footprint. Now, we ship in bulk straight to London Gateway, just outside on the Thames, and then move the wine in bulk to Garstown in Cheshire by train. And then working with NSERC, they have what they call their sort of 360-degree supply service. So on site at NSERC in Ellesmere Port, they create the bottles, they do the bottling for us, they store the bottles there for us, the finished goods, and then from there we distribute straight to supermarket RDCs, and then we have our European distributors come and collect from there. So what we've effectively done there is to tighten up that supply chain as much as we possibly can. And then I think, specifically with regards to glass, what we've effectively done there is, over the course of the last 4 or 5 years or so, I think we've basically reduced the weight of glass from around 445 grams per bottle down to, on average, about 400. So continually looking at how we can kind of take that or reduce that carbon footprint is really, really important. And then working with NSERC on, and throughout the industry, actually looking to improve the recyclability of glass.
So that's an important point. I'd like to ask you about that, because obviously recyclable is not the same as recycled. And glass has pretty good recycling rates generally, especially when you compare it to other packaging materials. But how do you go about improving recycling rates and making sure that glass goes back into the system and is recycled into more glass bottles? Well,
I think you're right that the consumers generally get the idea of recycling glass much more than many other products, and that's really good. So everything we can do, so every 10%, for example, of cullet, of broken glass that goes back into the furnace, basically reduces energy by a further 5%, and the CO2 footprint. So yes, everything we can do to encourage that recyclability.
What do you think, though, about alternative packaging formats like cans or bag-in-box or pouches?
Well, I think I look at Yellowtail as a mainstream brand, and at the moment, 100% of what we sell is in glass. That's not to say that other formats won't have some relevance, and I tend to look at these things by occasion. What is the occasion they're going to get used for? And if you think about cans, there is the ease of carrying, the ease of the fact that they can be taken on picnics and things like that. But ultimately, I think there is the question of what is the truth behind the carbon footprint of these other formats? What is the recyclability potential? And actually, going back to John's earlier comment about why glass is so important, what actually is the impact on the flavour? As you know, wine's got sort of high level of acidity in it, and what impact does that have on the lining of either bag-in-box or cans? And at the end of the day, what my worry about things like bag-in-box, for example, is that you really don't want any oxygen ingress at an early stage from a wine quality point of view. And for me, I think it's all about the consumer experience. What does the consumer expect? What is the quality that they want? And the thing about Yellowtail is that we make the wine easy to drink and easy to enjoy. And one of the key elements of that is when consumers find a wine they like, having shopped around the wall of wine, it's also got to be easy to find. And Yellowtail's distinctivity in glass format with the bright colors, the kangaroo, which actually incidentally is a yellow-footed rock wallaby, not a kangaroo.
Thank you for clearing that up. That's very important.
That's very important. You've got to be very distinctive so that people can come back and buy you again and again.
Now, turning to the future, if I'm buying Yellowtail in 2050, what's going to have changed by then?
It's interesting because if I look back over my 40 years and I look forward, say, another 30, there have been marginal changes in my 40 years. I think I've seen pouches come, go, and come back again in a small scale. Bag-in-box, I can remember dealing in 10-litre bag-in-box for the on-trade back in the day. I've seen that go to 3-litre, to 2.25. We've seen 1.5 bag-in-box at the moment. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that glass is going to be right at the heart of the wine industry in 30 years' time. I have no question about that at all in my mind. But I think what will be different is the ecosystem that goes around it. So much higher levels of recycling, much more energy efficient production. Yes, we'll continue to see wine moved around the world in bulk. And the biggest thing I think we can do over time is to see dirty fuel guzzling container ships move to much more efficient fuel. I think container ships, by all accounts, are the sixth. Were they a country, they'd be the sixth in CO2 emissions, apparently. So it seems to me that if that was to change, and why wouldn't it, with the way technology goes, I think we could see a very different situation in the background.
Simon Lawson, thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
So just to clarify one point, Simon wrote afterwards to say that he'd done his sums. A flight for 2 people from the UK to Malaga has the same CO2 emissions as 5,000 bottles being shipped from Australia to the UK, but by shipping in bulk, they can raise that to 7,000 bottles for the same impact.
So for the same equivalent of the flight.
So shipping bulk, it essentially saves about 40% of CO2 emissions, which is what he said in the interview.
And it's also quite interesting for me. I found that Simon clearly believes that glass will still be right at the heart of the wine industry in 30 years' time, but just in a different way to now, and with presumably, hopefully, with a different ecosystem around it.
Yeah, that was interesting. I know we've talked about this, haven't we? But again, the bigger picture. When you talk about shelf life, the importance of wastage, and not just the true recyclability, but also the actual recycling rates. And then you talk about the energy infrastructure all around these industries, like shipping and energy used for manufacture or recycling. It's hard to see alternative packaging taking over in a major way. And I guess it's good to be reminded of the values and virtues of glass at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree that improvements can and must be made all the way along the wine supply chain. We need to combat climate change. Wine needs to reduce its negative impact on the environment at the same time as maximising its sustainability, economic and social, as well as environmental. I mean, things have to change, but it's a question of how to do that best, not just rushing in and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it really does seem that glass will have a big part to play in that, with the caveat that improvements can and must be made on an ongoing basis.
Some food for thought there as we approach our festive drinking, on which note, our next episode will be a short but very special festive edition. And we don't just mean dodgy Christmas jumpers, although I might do that
and Christmas
anyway.
pants.
Christmas pants. Stop it. We'll have some delicious wine tips, won't we, for the holiday season, and a bit of fun too.
We will indeed. Now, please do get in touch if you'd like to talk to us about this episode or anything really. All the details are on our website, susieandpeter.com/podcast. Thanks to Dr. Nick Kirk and to Simon Lawson. Thanks to British Glass, and most importantly, thanks to you for listening. Until next time, with a virtual clink of our glasses, cheers.